As many of you at home will know, Indonesia has committed to building a battery electric vehicle industry and ecosystem within its borders and has issued regulations and laws in support of this development. Indeed, several manufacturers from around the world have signaled their commitment to help develop this industry right at home. Now, to talk more about what this industry might look like in the future, we are now sitting down with Rachmat Kaimuddin, the Deputy Coordinator for Infrastructure and Transportation of the Coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Investment Affairs. Pak Rachmat, thank you so much for taking the time to come sit down with us.
Pleasure, Pak Satya.
First of all, I'm sure many viewers have already heard some background about Indonesia's plans to develop a battery electric vehicle industry, but can you tell us the rationale that the government has behind developing such a vertically integrated electric vehicle industry in Indonesia?
Yeah, so basically there's multiple reasons to do it. We can look at that from the environment point of view. Like you know that today we are in climate crisis, and transportation is actually number 2 of the segment that actually emits CO2.
Right.
And then we also have seen that in Jakarta especially, the air quality is not that good, and tailpipes emission is actually the main cause for air pollution.
Okay.
So for environmental point of view, shifting from combustion engine with tailpipe emission to EV is actually very important. Also, you know that Indonesia import petrol,
right,
actually. So if we shift it to electric vehicle, basically this can support our energy security position. And the other thing is that we also were quite aware that the current industry, automotive industry, is actually very important for Indonesia. As everyone want to shift at some point to EV, we do need to have the industry in the country, because otherwise, if let's say, imagine if we don't have this industry at home, and everybody wants EV, but we don't have the industry in Indonesia, then we'll actually become a consumer market.
Right. Now, you've mentioned the industry itself, but it's not just about the production facilities or the production itself, the production of battery electric vehicles itself in Indonesia, is it? Because you want to have a vertically integrated industry, all the way from raw nickel to the final product of electric vehicles to be sold. Can you tell us about how this vertically integrated industry, this vertically integrated supply chain, I should say, would look like?
No, I think there are two sides, and maybe they will meet in the middle,
right,
to become vertically integrated. We discussed just now on the needs for Indonesia to have the local automotive manufacturing for BEV.
Okay.
And then if you have the local manufacturing for BEV, then you can have a battery module, battery pack industry.
Right.
Because battery module and battery pack industry, battery module and battery pack, they don't travel very well, right? So you have to be nearby with the auto industry. But if you look at further upstream, we speak a lot about hilirisasi or downstreaming,
right,
of our critical mineral, including nickel. What we want to do is to create value added for our nickel ore. Do we need to process everything into become like a car? I guess the answer is no. Right? Because Indonesia actually have maybe about a quarter of nickel reserve in the world, but today Indonesia maybe only have about 2% of the car production,
right,
of the world car production. So I don't think we want to make sure that all the nickels, if you want Indonesian nickel, you have to buy it in the shape of a car.
Right. Okay.
That is not the case. But we need to create car industry. We need to have nickel industry with as far down the value chain or the downstreaming as possible.
But let's move on to the manufacturing side of the supply chain, because last year, as we know, the president issued Perpres number 79 of the year 2023, which was specifically worded such that manufacturers do not need to build factories here, but only that their cars are produced here. So we already know some companies that are producing cars here. We have producing electric vehicles, I should say here. We have Hyundai and we have Wuling that produce pure EVs in Indonesia, while BYD and VinFast have also provided have shown their commitment to producing their vehicles here as well. Can you tell us how much capital has been invested by these companies in total, and perhaps how many jobs they can create and they have created so far?
Yeah. The presidential regulation is relatively new, and today, basically, only I think last month that we have finalized all the implementing regulation. So I think Hyundai and I think Stellantis are currently in the process of applying for this program.
Okay.
But that being said, some of these companies that is already here mostly have improved their production capacity.
Right.
I think Hyundai initially maybe like when they started in 2022 produced maybe about 3,000. Maybe you remember people have to wait like 2 years.
Right.
For an Ioniq 5.
Yeah,
right?
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then now maybe you can buy it right now. You can walk in. So because their capacity of production capacity has increased, Wuling and the group initially only have one model, which is Wuling REV.
Right.
And today they have launched at least 3 additional. Right. One is Dingo, and then MG, like 2 MG models. So you start seeing that more and more cars are being produced in Indonesia. There's another company that just mentioned also, which is Chery Omoda, and there's a few more. So in terms of production capacities, as they produce in Indonesia, obviously they will employ people. And the reason why we mentioned that you don't have to create factories, but you can, as long as you produce in Indonesia, of course, if you don't have factories and you want to create one, we are very, very welcome. But we also want to accommodate existing producers who want to shift from ICE to EV. Right. For example, Hyundai and I think Wuling are examples of that, right?
Yeah.
So they used to have 100% ICE, and they dedicated some of their production capacity for EV, and we would like to be able to support those companies as well.
Now it's interesting you mentioned that, because Stellantis, as you mentioned earlier, is actually, from what I've read, hoping to open their production line here as well, aren't they? Can you tell us perhaps some other EV manufacturers or ICE vehicle manufacturers that you'd like to convert to EV manufacturing and production in Indonesia that you have been pursuing to produce in Indonesia as well?
Yeah, so I think at least the 2 companies, like the 3 companies that I mentioned, Hyundai, Wuling, and Chery, are all ICE manufacturing companies that now have EV lines. Right. The ones that we are currently speaking with, discussing, is also the Japanese manufacturers.
Okay.
Yeah, I think right now they do have some EV products. If I'm not mistaken, Mitsubishi have issued they call it the mini expander, or AKEX or something like that. I forgot what is the exact name, but they have put it in GIAS and IMS a couple of times already. So I'm waiting for them to launch it in Indonesia, and as well as others. I know Toyota actually have an EV product. It's just right now they do CBU.
Right.
So Honda and everybody, but basically we are any manufacturers who wants to produce EV, we will actually ready with our incentive program, both for the manufacturers and also for the customers. Okay.
Let's talk about some of these manufacturers and perhaps some of the trends that we've seen in EV manufacturers, because recently there has been developments in battery technologies that do not use nickel. For example, some versions of solid-state batteries, as well as LFPs. So how will the Indonesian government respond to this? Will they still take them in with open arms, if you will, or will there be some other regulations about that as well?
Well, today I think for the BEV, the goal for us is to reduce our dependency to fossil fuel.
Right.
Right. So any type of technologies actually we welcome, as long as they comply with local content requirements.
Okay.
And at some point, that means that they have to produce the battery domestically. If they use nickel, then they will get the benefit of our supply chain.
Of course.
Yeah. But if you want to use other technologies, we are welcome. It just so happened that we know that nickel actually have certain characteristics, and LFP also have different characteristics, right? So LFP typically have less energy density than nickel. So it probably heavier, take more time to charge, and also have certain characteristic that maybe they are not that good in extreme temperatures, like snowy countries. In Indonesia, we actually have stable temperature, so if I think it's okay for Indonesian people to use LFP. Typically, LFP then is used for cars with lower performance. So, and in Indonesia, we want to focus on affordability.
Right.
So I think it's fine, right? But we are also not worried about the need for our nickel, because I mentioned Indonesia actually have 2% of the car markets. 2/3 of the car markets in the world is actually on 3 regions. 1/3 China, 1/6 North America, 1/6 is actually Europe. And these 3 regions actually have winter.
Right.
And typically they also have higher purchasing power. Potentially they probably will want higher performance battery, and typically that is, with the current mature technology, is actually provided by nickel base.
So really, it's all about the manufacturer's choice, is it? If they want to use nickel, then they can. If they don't want to, then they don't have to, for sure. But what's for sure as well is that for them to be able to gain the incentives, with the incentives, of course, obviously only provided to companies whose products follow certain conditions, i.e., being assembled in Indonesia being one of the conditions. But can you explain to us what these conditions actually are and why these conditions were set?
Yeah, so because the goal is for us to have the ecosystem in the country, right? Because we want to be able to make sure that later on our automotive industry, even in the era of BEV, we actually have it domestically. So what we put is, if you were to get all these incentives, you have to follow certain conditions, right? So initially we created that it has to follow the local content requirement roadmap, which is 40% by certain time, like, I think until 2026, and then 2027 become 60, and then by 2030 become 80. 40%, what does it take, right? What do you need is actually to assemble here, and also you have to use some local what do you call it, spare parts, local things in Indonesia, or you do R&D. So R&D is about, you need to spend about give or take 16 million euros over $60 million over 5 years. So about 50 billion rupiah for 5 years, so 250 billion in total.
Right.
That is not that big, but it's actually quite significant to push for more investment. But the moment you go to 60%, you need to have some sort of battery manufacturing.
Right.
At least battery module pack, right? And then by 80%, then the cell has to be made in Indonesia. I think that is what is required. Of course, in the Perpres 79 and other Permen Invest, we introduce this new program that will attract, that is designed to attract manufacturers who actually start from zero.
Right.
Yeah. So what we said is, you can import first. Until end of 2025, you can import, because we know that initially maybe you need time to build your market as well as build your capacity or factory, right? And then what you can import, we will waive some of this import duty and luxury tax, as long as you fulfill certain requirement, which means that you have to promise to produce the same amount of what you import by 2027.
Okay.
And you have to provide bank guarantee to guarantee that you actually do that.
Right. Well, it's going to be very interesting to see how this industry will develop into the future. Pak Rachmat, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
In doing this interview with us
Yeah.
at See Today.